That's better.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Coach on Fire Radio.
Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of your Journey to Success podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Weiss. I'm a life coach, speaker, and author based here in Phoenix. The goal here each week is to create a movement of people who are passionate about getting real information to move out of something I like to call the worst day cycle. All of us have suffered some type of worst day. For me, it was finding my alcoholic mother passed out naked on the toilet at the age of 10. As I have discovered, that day creates a self-destructive process that keeps us all from the life we want. I describe that process and I give you a roadmap to overcome it in my new book, Your Journey to Success, which is available in all formats on Amazon. This week, I'm bringing you a former client of mine, Drew Digrazia. He approached me a couple weeks back and said he wanted to share his story and how his decision to work on things in his past have had a positive effect in his life. So why don't we just get right to it? Drew, say hi to everyone. How you doing?
Hello there. Good morning. Very good. Thanks for having me on the show. You know, it's funny. I never thought of myself as a former client. You and I have a lot of connectivity, and I see on a regular basis. But I feel like I'm a lifetime client, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well, as you kind of found in this process, there is a process to it of, in the beginning, it's quite intensive, but then over time, as you learn the skills and tools that I talk about, you become your own coach. I mean, I don't want someone in my office for years that then something's not working. The idea is to give you, the things I've learned so that you can use that process to grow for yourself. So why don't we start by, what was it that brought you in originally?
Let's see. Originally, I basically, for all intents and purposes, I got to a point to where I was more stuck than in my previous life. Let me, if you don't mind, kind of share a background. Since childhood all the way up and through my teen years and basically up until that present day, everything was a constant inner battle.
Yeah.
Of just really what I call pooping sunshine and just keeping myself in the right state of mind. I found it very hard to I'm a sprinter when it comes to concentration. So the reason I give that backstory a bit is that what was different about this time was I had a connection with you, and I found myself at a point to where I could no longer control what was going on with myself. And what was going on was I was literally paralyzed, emotionally, physically paralyzed. And I think at that time, Kenny, I was 45. Yeah. And, I thought to myself, hey, here's the midlife crisis.
Yeah.
One of the triggers was my folks, my mother and father, moved but 2 miles from me after not having the closest relationship for many, 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 many years. And it was just interesting. I also found that I was just physically just out of loops, out of balance.
Yeah.
And that's what brought me to you.
Yeah.
I took the leap, and it was the best thing I ever did. To me, it was those sessions that we had, and then the continuing education and the tools that I got from it, literally for me, was a life changer. It changed everything. Could be pieces and parts and timing, but That's the backstory.
It's it's funny. In my book, I call it the worst day cycle. As I think more on it, I probably picked the wrong way to describe the cycle I talk about, because a lot of people go, well, I didn't have a horrific day like yours, finding your mom, or I wasn't beat, I wasn't abused, I didn't have this horrific life event.
Right.
And the misconception is that you have to have gone through a horrific event. It's simple things like that. Just a disconnect between you and your parents. Like most of my clients haven't been through something horrific, but the parenting model out there, none of us have been taught how to be a parent. And so our parents, unbeknownst to them, their intent is good, but they generally make us take care of them. And
right.
So then you end up moving close like that, and that triggers us. When we're younger, we're in so much denial. We have to be. It's how we survive it. But as we get into our really mid-30s, a part of our brain starts to degrade, and all of those feelings start to come up. That's really what midlife crisis is. And so as that part of the brain starts to degrade, we start to feel all that chaos and dysfunction and hurt and anger and confusion that we couldn't feel when we were younger. And it's very disorienting, which is really what it sounds like, you were going through. It caught you out of left field, because I know you'd done a lot of personal work on yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And
lots.
Yeah. And so what was the biggest piece? What was the first piece that you started to learn when we started working together?
It was really about, I guess, the best way for me to communicate it would be, there were really some of the things that come to mind were that the actions, the things that I was feeling were not originating from me.
Yeah.
They were actions from, for example, in that particular instance, and this is only one piece of it. There was other things culminating, going on around it. But it was realizing that, this is not on me. This is behavior that, for example, my mother was, showing to gain attention, to shame, me into feeling a certain way. And can
you give an example? Because this is the piece. This is exactly what I'm talking about. If people don't realize how this is what's keeping them from their greatness, from their success, is these subtle little ways our parents, unfortunately, or coaches or teachers in church, whatever it was, their intent is good, but they miss the mark, and it shows up later, these little messages. Can you give an example of one?
Well, my mother, as a background, she's been pretty much a person that, it's everything is doom and gloom. It seems like, right? And actually, she's had a very torrent medical history. It seems like the woman has been perpetually sick since she was probably 40 years old.
Yeah.
But it's real stuff that has come about. But when you start to look back at it, you can see kind of why. But to give you an example. So a real basic example was I had to get used to having this relationship with my family, my mother and father. And my mother, example, she would, when I would see her, she would live backwards, and she would bring up things that happened when I was maybe 17 years old. And so there was an instance where she had brought up that because of my behavior when I was 17 years old, the reason that she was part of it was the stress and the anxiety. The reason that she was sick today had to do with the fact that us children, which was myself, my older sister, and my deceased younger sister. And so what I noticed is that even though she didn't directly say it was me, she had grouped it into us kids had made her sick and broke her. And it's interesting because when she would do that, I would always go to the side of, well, hey, let's stop for a moment and just put things into perspective. You being ill today may or may not have anything to do with the stress that you had then, but you chose to be a parent. We were the children.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can't actually say that we caused you to be sick. And I would literally go toe to toe with her. And then in those instances, I said, look, Mom, I buffer it by, I love you, but I'm not living backwards.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry you don't feel well, but, let's look at the positive things. I became her coach.
Yeah, that's a couple things you brought up there. One, unfortunately, I've noticed, and I did, the reason I noticed this is I saw I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As parents, we expect our kids to love us. And so I heard myself, and I hear parents say it all the time, look, I put you through school, I put a roof over your head, I feed you, I do all these things. The least you can do is this for me.
Right.
Well, our kids owe us nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It was our choice to bring them into the world. And
Right.
And that's exactly my point, that the parental structure out there is, you kids owe me something because I've done so much for you. Well, think of what that leaves the kid feeling like, wait a minute, I didn't ask for this. I thought you chose it, Mom and Dad, so now I owe you? Like, I have to love you? And it was something, I had a profound moment with one of my daughters where I realized I was doing it, and I just stopped and went, oh my God, it's not her job to love me. It's mine to love her. That's really the role of a parent. Whether she loves me or not doesn't matter, because it's my responsibility. But because we aren't taught anything about emotions or how to, esteem ourselves, we end up reaching down and expect our kids to give us validation. I see this all over Facebook. Parents glorifying their kids so that they can feel better about themselves to their friend. Look at what a great parent I am. Well, that's not, kids aren't there to make us feel better about ourselves. Our job is to impart that on them. But we haven't been shown how to do that, unfortunately. So we as parents, we take. So how is that taking showing up in your life? What was the cause, or what was the effect that in business and personal life?
Well, there was a lot of triggers that were going on. That was, one of those things when it comes to my mother, and not so much my father, but, my mother, is that, her being stuck going backwards kept bringing back all these things that had happened in my very dysfunctional, upbringing, dysfunctional from my end, things that I actually thought that I was wrong. I was bad. It was my responsibility, because I was always that guy that was like, nope, I have to be accountable for what's going on. There must be something that I did then to cause those things. And what I realized was, in that instance, what I realized is that there was things that happened to me. They weren't my choices. They were things that happened to me. And again, that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that real quick. That's what kids do. You just said it. Pardon me, I'm sick as heck. I'm trying not to cough, but that's what kids do. When parents treat them that way, they then look at themselves and go, I must be to blame. I must be. Because it's the only way we can wrap our head around it. Because we can't blame our parents. We're too young to protect ourselves or do anything about it. So our survival mechanism is to degrade ourselves and make ourselves the problem. It gives us a level of power over it. At least that's what we think. That's what we're attempting. And that's where the cycle, we can get into that later, why that's so self-destructive. But that's what we do is our parents divorce. We make ourselves to blame. Our mother or father has an affair. It must be my fault. They're an addict. It must be my fault. They're sick. It must be my fault. It's the only way we know how to survive that. We'll get into that later. I just wanted to jump in on that because that's very common.
Yeah. Well, that was the interesting part to it. Oh, feel better. Poor guy. That was the interesting part to it.